Before I introduce our amazing winemaker panelists, we want to show you a short video regarding the JLB basket press, just so you, in case you don't have any experience, you can have a look at the process of the JLB itself. So in this case, the red wine pumice is being loaded into the basket. And there is a juice pan underneath as well. You'll see as they load, they actually place in some nylon scortans, which aid in the draining process. And then they'll do some additional loading. There's actually a bottom plate and a top plate that are utilized in the process as well. And loading is quite simple. Right now you're looking at the pressing plate and the protection guard. So Bucher Vaslin is very concerned about safety. In this case, you can see the red wine obviously running from the pressing. And there are 9 programs involved with the JLB basket press, so fully modifiable, 9 programs in total. Once the press cycle is complete, you're simply raising up a bit the top plate and removing the pressed pumice, and you have a beautiful cake. So at the end of the process, obviously you're going to remove the pumice and you're available to start a new cycle. So it's really rather quite simple, the vertical basket press. And now that you're familiar, I'd like to take a moment and introduce our guests. So joining us today, and thank you all for agreeing and being so gracious to join us, is Alberto Bianchi, who's the winemaker at Newton Vineyards. Cherie and Philippe Melka, Cherie, vintner and proprietor of Melka Estates, and Philippe Melka, a very well-known consultant with Atelier Melka. Mark Mazzoni is with us. He's the co-owner and winemaker for Zialena Winery, and Rebekah Wineburg from Quintessa. So I know all of these folks for many years now, so I'm very excited to have all of you with us. And I'm just going to ask each of you to introduce yourself a little bit at the outset, and just a question to reflect on your experiences with the JLB. So if you don't mind, Alberto, I'm going to address you first. And if you don't mind, please just introduce yourself. And from our relationship and knowing your winery, it's quite unique. In fact, I hope you don't mind, Alberto, that I mentioned that Newton is in fact 100% fully equipped with Bucher Vaslin equipment for all of the processing. And in fact, Alberto, you have both a JLB basket press and a Bucher pneumatic press. I don't know exactly if you've had an opportunity to compare or utilize the JLB in comparison with the pneumatic Bucher press, but if you don't mind speaking again a little bit about your experience with the JLB and maybe in line with the Bucher pneumatic press.
Good morning, Mia. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for the invitation. My name is Alberto Bianchi. I'm the winemaker here in Newton. This year is going to be the 6th harvest that I do up here. So I'm starting to learn a little bit about the winery and the vineyards. We got the GLB about 5 years ago. We have the 12, so we are able to load about 3.5 tons from fruit. and we got 2 cages. So in fact, the main differences that we've been seeing on red skins is, if we compare with the pneumatic one, is the creation of lees. The pneumatic we used in the past for the reds were giving us a big amount of lees that then we had to decant in tank and in barrels, and we noticed also the amount of lees in barrel during aging was much greater. While with the GLB, we are able to actually take the first part of the juice, which is very heavy in lees, and then just keep the clean wine that comes out for all the press cycle. We do a press cut, and that is separate, but really we are able to put wine in barrel after pressing, waiting 2 days in tank and then barreling down, while when we were pressing with the pneumatic, we are taking much longer with less greater results. Another use that we apply the press to is with old bunch red. So we've been making some old bunch and carbonic maceration, and pressing with this press is great because we can actually go high in pressure without have to spin the press, and so really keep the wine very clean. And I feel in that way we also reduce the phenolics, and the pressing fraction, it's to us at least more qualitative coming from the GBL. In fact, today we use the GBL exclusively for reds. For Chardonnay, obviously, we still use our pneumatic press.
That's really great, Alberto. Just a mention to everyone, if you have questions, we're going to be doing a question and answer session at the end of our discussions with our winemakers. So feel free to jot those down, and Eglantine will be handling the question and answer session at the end. So that's a very amazing response. I appreciate all of our winemakers being with us today, because it wasn't planned really, but you all have very unique wineries and very unique and different experiences of the JLB. So with that, I'm going to check to see if Cherie and oh, hey, there they are, and Philippe, Melka. Cherie called me earlier, guys, yeah. So thank you. Jonathan, Walden, thank you for joining us. Jonathan is the associate winemaker with Melka Estates, and I've known Philippe forever because he not only is the co-owner and winemaker for Melka Estates, but also amazing consultant with Atelier Melka. So thanks for joining us, gentlemen.
Thank you for having us. Yeah.
Yeah.
We it's happy to see some faces that I didn't see for a while. So Alberto, I saw him yesterday, so I cannot say it, but Mark Mazzoni, it's great to see Mark spend a while. So it's a good way to hopefully maybe not to catch up about a personal life today, but at least to see some good familiar faces. And I wanted to have Jonathan. Obviously, is I have to admit, you know, I'm getting old, so I'm getting a little bit away from touching the presses and, you know, really doing the work. So it's nice to have Jonathan, who is really doing it with a smaller version, the smallest version basically of GLB. I can say really, and I'm very proud that I bought the first one in the US for Vineyard 29, I think was back in 2003. And as you know, I bought a bunch. I mean, it's I had the chance also to meet the inventor of the press, Jean-Louis Bouillet. That's why it's called GLB, because that was his, obviously, Jean-Louis Bouillet. That was the name of the inventor of the press. And maybe you have a different story, me, I'm not sure, but the press was really created with this guy and the winemaker at Petrus, Jean-Claude Berrouet. Of course, they realized that at the time, those presses, those vertical presses were great, but they have a lot of, you know, inconvenience, especially because, you know, the cages were in wood, they were very labor intensive. They are not very easy to sanitize. So they wanted to basically upgrade to a more modern times this press. And at the time, I think, at this time, sorry, I don't know what's going to be the next, you know, generation, I would say, of the JLBs. That's, I'm still waiting. But of course, for winemakers, we want a press who can do the work by itself. And we don't have to do much just looking at it. But we'll see what happens. But on my side, I will say what I really like, first of all, it's basically using smaller lots. As you know, we really specialize on working with small wineries, smaller lots, more hands-on. I would say winemaking will require a little bit more detail and focus, and basically processing and pressing for a long time to really try to analyze every facet of the pressing. And this is a good press to see what's going on, basically. And like Alberto said, you know, we don't have a lot of sediment. It's kind of a natural filtration, you know, going through the skin. So that's really help a lot. We also use it for white for this reason, because we thought at the beginning, you know, with white, we didn't have to settle in tank, and we could have go directly from the juice to barrels, so to any kind of straight fermenters, if you wish. So that's really helped us quite a bit. We realized that the problem with pressing the whites was really more yield. We didn't have a lot of yield in general, and we had to do some what we call rebechage, and so it took a long time. So on one side, we were gaining with very little amount of sediment. On the other side, we were losing a little bit, especially if we had to rebechage or do a second press, if you wish, with oxidations. So, you know, we try a lot of different things, but I think what we really enjoy is really the organic way of pressing, in the sense. You feel a little bit less industrial, if you wish, and a little bit more adapted at the end for high-end small lots that we are always involved in.
Yes, thank you very much, Philippe, for that, because really I consider you as an early adopter. Obviously, you bought the first one in the US, so you are also a pioneer for the white wines. At first, it was a crazy idea. What is he doing? And now it's gone from sort of like a trend to utilize the JLB for white wines to now it's really a bit of a standard for the smaller wineries who want to do really high qualitative white wine as well. So I really appreciate it. Thank you. And what's interesting with your experiences on the bigger presses for your own winery, Jonathan, if we can turn it over to you, you actually have the JLB 5, the 5 hectoliter version, which is the smallest of the JLBs. So I can imagine, right, your process in the winery with the JLB 5. I believe you use multiple cages and pans in that case for your JLB 5.
Yes, exactly. So most of our lots are about 2.5 tons. So each tank requires 2 press loads, but we do have 2 baskets. So we can load one up, get the press load started while we're digging out the rest of the tank into the second basket. So works quite well for us. Hopefully no more than two press loads per tank, but it kind of depends on, as you know, the integrity of the skins at pressing and everything like that. So we do enjoy the small press basket because like Philippe mentioned, we kind of specialize in small lots. So it's very convenient for us to have that option.
Thanks for joining us today, and hopefully we'll have a chance, if Sherry has a chance to log on later, we'll see her as well. I'm going to move on to Mark Mazzoni now. He and I had it's interesting, Mark. You and I met on several occasions when you were building your new winery, but I have yet to be there. So we spent a little bit of time on the phone last week while you were agreeing to do the webinar with us. And I had not realized, Mark, that you're actually a one-man show at Zialena. So Mark, if you don't mind maybe taking us, after you introduce yourself, to take us through your process in the cellar. I think it might be quite unique in the way you have to manage from pressing to barrel. Again, being a one-man show in the cellar, I think it's quite interesting. You have the JLB 12, so it'll be fun to have you take us through your process in the cellar at Zialena.
Yeah, thanks. I'm Mark Mazzoni from Zialena. We're located in Geyserville. It's a family winery I built with my sister in 2016 and purposely bought the JLB 12 for our wine program. My experience with JLB came actually with Philippe Melka, and now I'm learning the first press in America at Vineyard 29 in 2005. So thank you, Philippe, for the introduction.
You're welcome.
It's a fantastic press. I bought that one, as I said, specifically for the winery. I have it on kind of display. It looks beautiful in the winery. But I also have a small Paleo pneumatic press that I purchased used for the white program in 2017. My biggest gripe with that one is it's difficult to clean. I am a one-man show, so I am the one getting inside. I think the JLB sanitation protocols are probably half the amount of time, and I feel much more complete. So once I get through the whites in early August and September, I'm kind of happy to put that to bed and look forward to using the JLB. So I am by myself, but I bring on people for fruit sorting. So those are really the only days. The rest of the year I have no harvest intern, no lab help. It's just me. It's a very small facility, and I designed it that way. So the differences that I do probably from some of the other people on this panel is that I do a lot of Zinfandel. So I have 10 concrete tanks. Each one holds about 3 tons. And with Zinfandel ripening around 2 weeks before the cab, I bring in Zinfandel. I fill 10 tanks. I press those out after about 14, 20 days of extraction. And then I do it all over again with cab. So it's really critical that that turnover time for pressing on the Zinfandel to the Cabernet is fairly quick. So I only have 1 cage, but with the JLB 12, it fits that must perfectly. So the turnaround time shoveling a tank, even though I'm by myself, I'm typically emptying a tank and have it, the press cake, being disposed of within about 3 hours. So it's a really efficient machine as well. For the Zinfandel, my program is I am looking for some of that phenolic content towards the end of pressing. It's something that I do want because Zinfandel, as we know, in those lighter stages can be a little bit fruity and simple. So I actually combine everything. I don't make a press cut with the Zinfandel. It all goes to tank, and then I allow the lees to settle overnight because I don't want to rack that wine quite as much throughout aging, and those wines are being unfined and unfiltered. So there's a little bit of settling with the Zin. The cab is completely different. Doing it myself, I had developed this system where each tank is around 7 barrels. So I prep the barrels the night before on pressing, and then I number them 1 through 7. So very simple system, numbering 1 through 7. And I don't taste at the press, which might seem a little bit crazy. I know there's so many different things happening during pressing, but really I take the time to analyze it much later. So as we go through what I use as a native ML with quite a bit of stirring, usually February, March, as those are all complete, I then go back and I taste. And I use that 1 through 7 number as a reference to know where I'm at. And I went back and I looked at the numbers because I knew that we were going to be doing this panel today. And out of the 60 barrels of Cabernet I made in 2019, 16 went to my reserve program. And out of those 16 barrels, all the tanks 1 through 10 were represented. And all of the barrel numbers 1 through 7 were represented. So I think it just goes a long way to show when you're going directly to barrel that it's just one small kinetic difference. It might be a little more lees in one barrel. It might be a little bit more time in the sump, but you pick that up 3 months later. So that's the difference that I have between Zin and Cab and utilizing the press for those 2 different reasons.
Thank you, Mark. That's it's great for you to have shared that process with us. Again, each of you have your own unique stories and your own processes. So by contrast, we're going to turn it over to Rebekah. Rebekah, you actually have 2 JLB 20s. So yeah, so we're going really from the smallest JLB 5 through a one-man show, both Bucher pneumatic versus JLB, and then Rebekah, if you can speak a little bit maybe about your process. You have a little bit larger cellar with 2 JLB 20s. So it would be great for you to talk about that process, as well as the grape varieties that you utilize and any sort of program management from year to year that you do with your JLBs.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, we have 2 JLB 20s, which were originally the water operated ones, which we've had converted to the oil. And we are a little bit larger. We're doing between about like 800 tons in all Bordeaux varieties. Wow. And so the way we have it set up is the 2 JLB 20s. Each of those will press a 5-ton fermenter. Each of them have 2 baskets. And so we'll dig out the tanks after an overnight drain, dig them out into the baskets, and then start pressing. We use a pretty typical cycle. And like Alberto said, we have, we separate, we do it in 3 sections. So there's the first press, which we can either call pan or P0, which is really leesy. And then we have the core press, which is actually what I'm looking for, which is about 0.02 to 1.1 bar. That's our good press. And then we have the hard press. And you know, I've found that doing this separation, I mean, it's by taste, but usually every vintage, after the first few tanks, we kind of figure out what this vintage looks like in terms of how the pumice is going to taste, how it's going to extract, and make those kind of separations. Because of this size of a winery, I can't be at every press. So we set this, like every vintage, we set this separation and then let it go for the rest of harvest, keeping it all separate. And I found in the last few years, I've been at Quintessa now 5 years, I'm including almost 5% of press into my top wine, which is pretty impressive. We also do, Mia, you might not know, we actually do have a bladder press. I think we have the 100 expert. And when we get it, yeah, so we bought that for processing from white grapes, whole cluster, and for also kind of like overflow for a sister winery that we will process fruit for. And so we've noticed the difference between the two because we have that, you know, that direct comparison. And we found that, like, if you're looking at just yield, the vertical press, the JLB, will give me about 5 gallons less per ton, but the quality is so much better. So if it goes into the bladder press, that press is not, that pressed wine, which we keep all of the pressed wine separate, does not end up being utilized for the Quintessa blend.
That's an amazing testimony. Is there anything you can put behind that in terms of technical details for the extraction versus phenolics, that sort of thing?
Yeah, you know, I've tried to mimic, like to try and make a mimic of the JLB in the bladder press. So like not very much turning, very slow. It's fast, it's a faster press. I mean, it's efficient, except for the cleaning. You've got to get inside it. I mean, of course, in this situation, I don't anymore. But, you know, I think it's just, it's the lees content for it and the amount of seed tannin that I'm getting from the bladder press. It's just so much more. It doesn't have that self-filtering function that the basket does. And it's, you know, it's kind of moving everything around. And so what I'm finding from the bladder press is that it's a more grainy tannin. And in my situation, that's not usable for my blend because I already have plenty of tannin in the free run.
Correct, correct. Good. Well, this is meant to be a relatively short and hopefully helpful winemaker exchange for yourselves and for the audience as well. I've asked a few questions of you all, but I think it would probably be helpful if we turn it over now to Eglantine, and she can manage some Q&As, because certainly we have an amazing panel with a great amount of experience and varying experience with our JLB. So that Eglantine, if you can have people open up their chat, and maybe if you guys don't mind hanging on just a little bit longer to answer some questions.
Sure, Mia. Thank you. Thank you for everyone for being here. So if you can write your question in the chat or in the Q&A box, and I will start reading. Of course, if some of the panelists have questions for each other, feel free to ask every question you have to. The first question we have, actually we have 2 times a very similar question about white wine and white grapes and GLB. So the question from Kylie is, can the panelists expand on their use of the GLB on white, please? Variety, whole cluster, juice yield, and how the chemistry changed during pressing and what parameters are being measured. That's a pretty complete question. I'm not sure everybody uses it for white, but I know Philippe does. So I guess maybe Philippe, you can answer first.
Yeah, so it's really depending, obviously, of the type of grapes you're using, but we are using it for Sauvignon Blanc on the side. That's really kind of the grapes. I would say that I'm trying to remember if I use it for other type of white grapes. I don't think so. Anyway, we did. So basically, we started, you know, trying to learn about how to press white grapes. So we started with whole clusters. That was the first idea, because we felt like whole cluster would be the most quality-oriented pressing. So we started with the first cage, trying to fill up as much as we could, step on the grapes, you know, to really trying to create this compaction of clusters and be as efficient. And then we pressed, and we realized 2 things, obviously. Like I was saying earlier, the good part was really the limited amount of sediment. The NTUs basically were very low, so very clean juice on this first basket press. We pressed at a very high pressure as well. And so we still felt like we were getting quality juice, and to really get a sense of the quality of juice was really measuring the pH. Basically was really for us the best indicator of the quality again. So the pH, when the pH doesn't move and stay very stable, it's usually a very good sign. And if you have a shift of pHs, that's mean you're really starting to get to the phenolics of the grapes and really lower the quality of your juice. So on the first basket press, we were very happy about low NTUs, not switching the pHs. Where we are not happy about were really the yield. We were getting very low yield. So as you know, usually for white, at least for high-end wines, we are getting about 140, 150 gallons a ton. We can get more, we can get a little less, but that's pretty much the average. But on the first case, we were getting more like, you know, 80, 90 gallons a ton. So we were feeling like we were not getting everything out of those clusters. And so we had to do what we call a rebêchage, means, you know, remove the, if you wish, the clusters from the cage by dumping those clusters into a bin, whatever you can think, what will be efficient. And then we'll put those clusters, we mix those clusters a little bit back to the cages. So that's create friction, that's create oxidation. And then we press again, and we realized that the second press basically was never the same quality than the first one. So that's something you have to think about. It's almost like you you create 2 tiers of quality by doing this process. So then we did also basically we tried to brainstorm, should we destem? So we destem as well to be basically more efficient and to have more juice, but that was not good enough, and there was even more oxidations. Then we did also destemming in a very cold environment, so to create almost like what we call the cryo extraction. So means really we kind of soften the skin. They are so soft that basically they release, you know, the juice instantly. But also we realized by doing so we had more oxidation, obviously, going. So we decided to sacrifice yield for maintaining high quality of juice. And if we had a program with 2 tiers of quality of wine, where we're able to basically select the press of the first cage, if you like, without the rebêchage, and the second pressing will go in a second tier of quality of wine. That was a way to basically do it in the most efficient way we could.
Thank you, Philippe. I think there is one more question actually for you that I'm not sure you said or not. But did you try to crush the grapes before on white? Veronique is asking this question.
Yeah, so yeah, there's a process. There's people who are doing like basically using the crusher for whole cluster before going to the cage. We didn't, so I cannot really say. I don't know, Jonathan, we did. Sorry, sometimes I miss my something somewhere, but I don't think we tried it here at the winery. So I cannot relate to that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The next question is from Doug.
Maybe is there anybody in the panel trying to crush the white grapes before pressing? I was just curious. Maybe. No?
We thought in trying doing that with some Chardonnay. We haven't used that press on Chardonnay yet. But the problem I saw that stopped me doing that is that by the time you crush and fill the cage, you depending where you do it and how your crush pad is made, maybe overflowing the pan. So either you're able to already plug a pump to the pan and then unplug it and bring the pin or the cage to the press, or for instance, we were not able to do that.
Okay.
It's a good question. So I think that maybe that'll be something that as I'm out in the field this year and speak to different people, maybe that is something we can ask of our affinity group, the JLB affinity group, and see what's out there. So thank you for that question. That's a great question.
It is. I have another question from Doug for Alberto. Alberto, did you say you still press to tank and settle there before barreling down? If so, does that minimize your need to rack the barrel later?
Yeah, when we got the GBL, what we started to do since the beginning was isolate the first fraction of the press, which is almost a free juice, free wine that comes from the skins in the basket. And that was directly going with the heavy press later on. And then we were taking the core. And the core of the press, which is what we saw to be more qualitative, was isolated in tank by itself. And then the heavy pressing together with the first one. We've been doing that for 5 years. It gives very good results. And indeed, if you're able to do that, you will find already in the tank after 2 days of settling much less lees than what you would find if you keep the first part or if you don't do press cut at all. Last year, what we've done is a very different approach. We basically assigned to each of our tanks a quality value. And then as we were pressing, we were still isolating the first part, but after done that, we've been filling barrels. So we produced, let's say, 50 different barrels of the core by appellation. We work on 3 different appellations. And then the heavy press was still collecting in tank. And I have to say, we were able to recover a big part of wine that otherwise would have been blended with the various vineyards. And we're gonna be able to use a big fraction of wine for our top wine, which is great. Now, for the settling, generally we do 2 racking on Cabernet. So 1 after malolactic, where we see less lees, much less lees than when we use the pneumatic press. And then another racking about now. And then whenever we go to tank to bottle in next year. And that is really enough for us to go in bottle unfiltered with 10 NTU or less.
Okay, thank you. I have one last question here for all the panelists, actually. Do panelists put entire fermenters through the press or take free run first with a pump and strainer? I imagine you have different answers depending who is going to talk, but Rebekah, do you want to maybe first answer this question?
Maybe Mark?
Yeah.
Rebekah and Mark are probably different.
I do always drain and keep the free run separate. So I drain off the free run and then press the pumice. I have, depending on the tank, I do sometimes put the press immediately back in with the free run though. But I never like sluice or not have a well-drained pumice go into that.
I think you actually mentioned, Rebekah, that you actually do your free run overnight. So you allow your tanks the free run to do overnight. So there is that recommendation to do the draining of the tank the evening before you would anticipate pressing the next morning. So that's a good, but obviously you can press day of, but the recommendation is always to manage your free run the day before, which is, I believe, what you do. And you mentioned that you do, Rebekah.
I do. I mean, I like an overnight drain, and then logistically, it's also better. I mean, we have done same day before, and it's a much harder pumice to dig out. Yeah.
So I do not drain overnight. And when I designed the concrete tanks, I took the small stainless rim on the bottom of the drain off. So the drain is directly on the bottom of the floor. So when I come in the morning, I get a fairly complete drain because there's not that small lip of stainless that would hold that little bit of wine back. So typically when I drain in the morning, that free run goes directly to barrel, and then I let it drain for about 2 hours. And after 2 hours, I've been able to shovel that tank into that one pan that I have, and I do not have any overflow, which has been really nice. Just logistically, I do fill the tank up with the pumice. It takes 30 minutes, but there's still very little wine at that point.
Yeah, generally we'll try to drain the day before if we can, based on logistics of the winery, at what point we are in harvest. You know, sometimes it's the day of kind of thing. But we've noticed that when we drain them the day before, it does make digging out the tank much easier. The skins are already more dry, and we're able to capture a little bit more free run in our lots. So kind of depending on the tank as well, we'd like to drain the day before if possible.
So I would say one last question, and then we are probably gonna stop. And if you have more questions, you can always email it to us, which is a question from Doug. So we have problem when we press whites at higher pressure. Some of the skins escape the top of the cage around the margin of the press ram. Any idea how to mitigate this? Yeah, Philippe, anybody wants to answer this one?
We usually shrink wrap the cage You know, we shrink wrap the cage, and you know, it's not 100%, but until we feel like it's better to, except if they don't do what I call the rebéchage, you know, the dumping, and they really want to maximize this first press and go a little crazy on pressure. But otherwise, yeah, we shrink wrap, and if when we feel like it's really, even the shrink wrap doesn't work anymore, then we say let's stop and do the rebéchage.
Yeah, and we can follow up with Doug as well. Doug, after the webinar, I think that I'm not sure if you're using the score tans, but we found if you perhaps increase a little bit the number of score tans. So we have some people now utilizing 5. Normally you would have 3 score tans, which is the little nylon mats that they're using up to from 3 to 6 mats now for the white wines in order to reduce the amount of loss of skins through the cage. So that is something that we can do.
Yeah, I started to not choosing them because they were taking more time to clean and so forth and so on. But that's a good point. I think at the beginning we were using them and we were like feeling that maybe they are not that useful, at least for us. And so that's why, and they were like, again, they were all very long to clean, and so that we really quickly decided not to use them anymore. But maybe that's helping, which I didn't know. So it's good learning. Always
Exactly.
something.
Exactly.